Loomis. I am a professor of history, and I am also the interim director of Center for Humanities this semester, while Eve Stern is on her research leave. Sorry, I just need to pull up some information here. Yeah, here we go. I wanted to start by thanking the College of Arts and Sciences and the Division of Research and Economic Development. This is the third lecture in our pop culture series this year, and as this is the last lecture of the fall semester, I thought this would be a great time for those of you both in person and online. Thank you. Welcome to all of those online to announce our really awesome schedule for the spring semester as well. So, really quickly, on February 26th, we'll be having Courtney M. Cox from the University of Oregon on a talk called Double Crossover, Gender, Media, and Politics in Global Basketball. On March 26th, there'll be Stephanie Burt from Harvard talking a talk about Taylor Swift. I don't know if she's coming from Westerly or not, but she should. And then on April 23rd, will be Jeffrey Wilson, also from Harvard, on a talk Why Shakespeare. And so it's going to be a really cool rest of the year for this cool pop culture series. And it's my great honor to be able to help bring in people like Lee Francis, who will be speaking to you today. And the way that we do this here is that I do a quick introduction of the person who's going to introduce the speaker. And this kind of expands our world of connections and possibilities. Sometimes it's a member of the faculty here. Sometimes it is a community member. And for today, I'm deeply honored to be able to introduce Lauren M. Spears, who is an enrolled Narragansett tribal citizen and the executive director of the Tamaqua Museum. She holds a master in education and received a Doctor of Humane Letters honoris causa from URI for her dedicated work. She is an author, artist, and curator, has received numerous awards, and was recently inducted into the Rhode Island Heritage Hall of Fame, which is super cool. So, Loren, would you please get started here? Thank you.
Ascoi Kwasin. Let me try that again. Ascoi Kwasin. Better. Hello, everyone. I'm going to first start us off in hopefully a good way by doing an opening blessing and a land acknowledgement from an Indigenous perspective, and then I will introduce my friend Lee. Kanupiam, Wuchi ni Tampawag ka ni Tansawag at Akia na Haigansek. Katabatash Katantua Wuchi Wami no Wia Nakan Wuni Tiawank. Katabatash Katantua Wuchi Nepawus ka Matakwasag. Katabatash Katantua Wuchi Nanapashek ka Anakwasag. Katabatash Katantua Wuchi Kitan ka Nipawase. Katabatash Katantua Wuchi Namas Napeshawag ka Wami Peshinwak. Katabatash Katantua Wuchi Wata Peshawag ka Miniash. Katabatash Katantua Wuchi Suchipo Sokanun Kachausha Niempaog ka Wayupayanash. Nashbi Mishitashim Payangwa Kachisatao. Kakantambu Wami Sakwan Kisakwan Takwanik ka Paponi. Pashao Nashbi Wanitiawank. Katabatash Katantua Wuchi Wami Paman Tamwe Tian Gonash. Katabatash Katantua Wuchi Tiangananog. Katankat Kwam Ananantam Mahag Ka Nashawank. Kanashawanku Kachisamai Unkunginawan. Kakantamu Ginau Aquane Wami Pashkoni. Katabatash Katantua Wuchi Wami Wunyan Senya Nukasaki. Katabatash Wuchi Wami Kamaguamnash Namanatum. So what I said to you in the Narragansett language is I said, welcome to all my friends and relatives to the homelands of the Narragansett Nation. Thank you to the Creator for all the beauty that surrounds us. Thank you for this lovely day. Thank you to the Creator for the sun and the clouds, the moon and the stars. Thanks to the Creator for the ocean and the clear waters. Thank you to the Creator for the fish, the birds, and all animals. Thank you to the Creator for the forests, the plants, the flowers, the berries, the fruit. Thank you to the Creator for the snow, the rain, the thunder, lightning, and the winds, because with a storm comes a cleansing. We wish for all the seasons, spring, summer, fall, and winter, to burst forth with beauty. We thank the Creator for all living things. We give thanks to the Creator for our ancestors, those who suffered mind, body, and spirit to ensure that we're still here. We give thanks to their spirits wash over us. We wish for peace in the future, and we stand together to protect Mother Earth. We give thanks for all the beauty that surrounds us, and we thank the Creator for all our gifts. And so as I welcome you all here today, I must acknowledge 400 years of conquest, colonization, genocide, land dispossession, enslavement, forced assimilation, detribalization, and erasure of the Narragansett and other indigenous nations of the Americas. I must also acknowledge the bravery, the resilience, the perseverance, adaptability, and agency of our ancestors who ensured our continuation, passing forth our traditional ecological knowledge, language, history, and culture while contributing to the creation of this colony, state, and country. There is no U.S. history without Indigenous peoples' history, and there's no Rhode Island history without Narragansett, Niantic, and other Indigenous peoples' history. This is our homeland since time immemorial. We are still here. May we always remember we are the land, and what we do to the land, we do to ourselves. We must care for the earth, Mother Earth, to ensure future generations. And just so that you know, a land acknowledgement is just a beginning. As organizations start to create them, the idea is that you must put actions behind it. And even as a Native-led organization, we put actions behind it by founding the Indigenous Empowerment Center to impact and empower Indigenous people, also to represent our museum exhibits from a first-person perspective, and to partner with places like the University of Rhode Island and many other organizations across the region and across the country. Katabatash Akwane Kaninantam. Thanks, peace, and blessings. And so just one more thing before I introduce our esteemed guest. I don't know, sometimes the elders speak to me, and there's a song, it's called Unaweekan, and it means we dwell here. It's the idea that our ancestors' bodies are in this place, but also our knowledge is in this place, our language is in this place, our being is in this place. Everything about who we are as Narragansett people is in this place. But I'll extend that to newcomers that come to this place, that over the generations, your families and your communities are connected to this place. So, Unaweekan, we dwell here. You know how we can, you know how we can, you know we can, wait till you know we can look. Way hard, way hard, way hard, way hard, way hard. You know we can, you know we can, wait till you know we can do. Way hard, way hard, way hard, way hard, way hard. You know we can, you know we can, wait till you know we can do. Once for the past, once for the present, and once for our collective future. Katabatash. Now, I look forward to introducing our guest, Dr. Lee Francis IV, Pueblo Laguna, also known as Dr. IndigiNerd. Now, I practiced that and still tripped over it. Is the founder and chief imagination officer of the Indigenous Imagination Workshop, an organization dedicated to sparking and cultivating Indigenous imagination. And boy, do we have that. He is an educator and entrepreneur and is the founder of Indigenous Comic Con, Indigenous Worlds of Wonder, the Indigenous Futurisms Festival, Native Realities, and Red Planet Books and Comics. He is also an award-winning writer and editor, has multiple publications from poetry to short stories to comics. He was the host and lead writer for IndigiGenius on New Mexico Public PBS, and the co-producer of Sovereign Innovations on PBS Digital. He's also the creator of Sovereign Gardens, a Native American kid puppetry show that teaches youth about gardening and food sovereignty. He continues to be a strong advocate for Native American youth, especially in helping them in areas of creative entrepreneurship. He lives in North Carolina with his family, and we are blessed today to have him here with us. So welcome, Dr. Lee.
Guatsi Haupa, the Wasti Washrap Wahindo Me Lee Francis, Washesh Kaweka Me, Americana Me. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Lee Francis. I also go by Dr. IndigiNerd. We had it right the second time around. My family's from the Pueblo of Laguna, which is about 45 miles west of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I have been doing nerd work and IndigiNerd work. Let me get my camera set. Hold on one second. Where are you? Laptop. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So we got that set up. So I've been doing this kind of work since I want to say I was a wee young Pueblo lad. I have loved popular culture. I have loved comic books and graphic novels and video games. Coming out of my household, my dad was a huge technophile. So I know some of you younger generations, but some of the older folks might remember the TRS-80 from back in the day, one of the first personal computers that you could have at your house. So I grew up on a lot of that. But my background really is in education. And when I started out this kind of work, the work that I do from my community, it was really because when I saw young people in my classroom, there wasn't a lot of material for them, especially in the way that I grew up around comics and superheroes and whatnot. There was a lot of kids' resources, and then there was a lot of adult resources by Native and Indigenous writers. But there wasn't really anything in the middle to sort of scaffold that. And what I was really looking for was these superheroes. I was looking for things that my young people could gravitate towards and how they could see themselves represented in that space, because representation is really important. You've heard it. We talk a lot about it. Most of the time, even if it's just a little bit of representation, what we like to see is how we can connect in fiction and popular culture to those things that gravitate and draw us into that space. So this is where I began my journey. And so tonight, I'm going to say onward, IndigiNerds, and we're going to talk about the past, present, and future of Indigenous comics and popular culture. So that's our company, the Indigenous Imagination Workshop. As you heard from the biography, there's a lot of stuff that I've done over the time, from starting Comic Cons, publishing comics, working through all of these various aspects of Indigenous pop culture, if you will. And most of it really was a way in which I could also create something that I wanted to see. Not just seeing myself in there, but also wanting to see sort of the work itself. I was like, oh, this would be great. And I can make superheroes and I can write superheroes. So in a lot of this work, as any good entrepreneur, I'm just going to do it myself. Because it wasn't out that I want to be like, hey, you, go write something for me. That'll be fine. You're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I was just like, I'm just going to do it myself instead, right? You're like, I don't know what just did. It's all good. You don't have to write anything, all right? So this last year, we consolidated everything that I had been doing in the past years under the new company that we call the Indigenous Imagination Workshop to spark the Indigenous imagination, because that's always been what I have hoped to do. And the Indigenous imagination is not necessarily solely for Indigenous peoples, but it is an understanding and a reflection of where we come from and the indigeneity that we have. The learnings from Indigenous people, and how do we carry that forward in our everyday lives? So how do we spark that imagination in ourselves, and how do we draw upon that wisdom from the people of this land and from our own ancestors and ancestral spaces? And that's what we're all about. So I like to start like this. For those of you as Native folks that are in this space, too often in popular culture and popular media, this is not what's represented. So I like to give this as our base fundamental. Native young folks, just being young folks, right? Doing what y'all do as college students, as grad students, as folks going about your daily life. And one of the things that these young folks have to deal with, and the young folks that I grew up with, is really around what I call a sort of triangulation space in these particular areas. And we talk about identity, authenticity, and erasure. And so most of Indigenous popular culture comes from these particular areas about how we are reflecting and responding to those in our current space as Native creatives, as Indigenous pop culture artists, and in the work that we're doing. So identity really talks about who tells the story. Authenticity talks about how that story is told. And erasure talks about who's missing from that story. And this triangle is really perpetually in this perpetual state for Native people within this place we call Turtle Island, that we call America, because these are the things that we're dealing with in this space, right? So the identity aspect of this is who tells the story, right? Too often our stories are not told and have not been told by us, right? And then how is that story told? So there are folks that have been welcomed in, as we welcome in people to be a part of this land and this spaces. How are they telling the story? Is it told in a responsible way? Is it told in a way that celebrates, that brings the nuances out? And finally, we have to deal with the erasure. Who is not a part of the story? Native folks in this space have been erased in many instances. The complexities of Native identity, the histories of Native people have not made it into mainstream popular culture. Most of it's been essentialized. And so this is what we're looking at when we talk about Natives in pop culture and the work that we do around Natives in comic books, graphic novels, games, toys, collectibles, TV shows, movies, science fiction, film and television. So I'm going to take you back. It's a little bit of a history lesson tonight. So we start here. So one of the earliest representations of Carib people from the islands, this is an early linotype cut of the folks down in this direction from the island folks. And this is really when we begin to establish our early Native identity. So what are some of the things that we can see from here? Call them out. What are some of the things that you notice of the archetypes? In the back. Don't be afraid. I'm not calling on you specifically. I'm just shouting that direction. Don't think I'm pointing at anybody else. Go ahead. All right. So got a feathered headdress. What else? No shirts. No, just naked. Everybody's naked all the time. What else? Yes. And there's a parrot on the finger, like Beastmaster, right? Like just calling animals in. What else? Tattoos. Absolutely. And there's one other thing. What's he holding? Spear, bow and arrow, spear, yeah, same kind of thing, right? How's she looking? Y'all know how she's looking. There's the one thing that everything's out there in the world, right? That's the naked part that we were talking about, right? She also got a couple of kids around in that space, right? So these early representations of Native people begin back with the first contact. And this is the first kind of representation. We call this particular era, this establishes at first contact, probably until about the early 1700s. We call this era the era of the noble savage. Now that term was first used in the mid-1600s in a play called The Conquest of Granada by John Dryden, English playwright John Dryden. And what it establishes is this concept of a noble savage that has these noble qualities. The headdress looks like what? A crown, right? They are well built, they're tall, they stand amazingly in these spaces, but they're also savage. They're also primitives because they're not English, they're not European, right? And so there's this contradiction in the terminology in and of itself that's established by Dryden, but also it is used to create this separation, this othering in the space. There's European and English, and then there's the noble savages, there's the others. And from that point, you see also that in the historical records from Columbus, from Spanish explorers, they talk about these types of people that live in this idyllic space that is untouched by modernity at the time. And they all have particular similarities and trends. So this then gets translated into the images that we begin to see. Now, you called out a whole bunch of those particular things. Those are all correct. What we see here from starting with our fella, our noble savage on the left, we see a number of tropes that we continue to see to this very day, but obviously the bow and arrow utilizing this as a primitivized type of weapon. We see him sitting there shirtless. He is absolutely naked and shirtless, but also look at how cut this guy is, right? That is a six-pack up in that space. I just want to say, I don't look like that at all. So I'm a Pueblo, as my dad used to call us. We are round and brown. That's how we are, right? We are farmers, so I don't see myself represented this in many ways. There's a little tattoos on there, this sort of objectification, this exoticization of the identity. And of course, we see talking with animals as being one of the main things, right? So this connects up to nature. And we see this kind of thing replicated over and over again in terms of Native identity throughout popular culture. So even if you're thinking about right now, some of the representations of Native folks that you've seen, even in popular movies up until this day, there's usually some aspect or element of this. I think, I always think of, what is The Magnificent Seven? You guys remember that just came out, the re-release with Denzel Washington? The native guy there, what's he riding in on? He just got a vest. He got that six-pack right there. He's a good-looking guy. Bow and arrow, right? And he has sort of these specific sort of mythical powers. Good tracking. You can always hear things blowing in the wind, right? So you see that as this native guy. Now, one of the pieces of this is what we call, it's a hypermasculinization. Because if you, as a colonizer, are coming into a space, you are certainly not going to take pictures of the scrubs, right? Because that doesn't showcase how you are coming in. You want to fight the toughest of the tough. You're not going to be there being like Jimmy that's 5'3", Sorry, Jimmy, if there's a Jimmy back here, I apologize. There's 5'3", you're not going to be showing 5'3". You're showing 6'10" with a crown because it justifies in that space either the negotiations that you're making as nation to nation or the conquering and colonization of those folks to show your virility. Okay. Now, John Dryden was putting this in a way as the noble savage as to create a counterpoint to sort of the lazy, rascal English, right? Like, why can't you look up? Why can't you live up to this, right? They're savages, and yet they still act better than you do. And so it was used as a cautionary tale where the native character, especially the native man, becomes sort of a trickster demigod to be a counterpoint to English folks at the time. Spreads like wildfire throughout Europe, and our understanding with that. Now, our counterpoint here is our female character, which we call sort of the Pocahontas, right? So this is the Pocahontas understanding, and we can see there she is right there, and her hair is always blowing in the wind, right? What does she also do? She talks to animals. She got two animal characters that come with her. Got a raccoon and a hummingbird. Yes, I've seen the movie, I know, right? Tattoo. She's definitely got some bling going on there. She is definitely going to some sort of like dinner party. She's got an over-the-shoulder look right there. Looks very fancy with her fashionability. And I swear that hair literally is always blowing. If you go back and watch the movie, just check it out. Her hair it's like she's got somebody fanning her through the entire film. Like it is always blowing in the wind, right? The colors of the wind, if you will. So this is our Pocahontas. So very similar in terms of our noble savage and sort of our hyper-masculine, this is our hyper-feminized and objectified, exoticized female in this space. And where we can see that, we can see this in the exact same kind of parallels from this old cut type. Now, this is not to say anything about the movie itself. I guess I didn't start out for everybody. All the stuff I'm going to talk about in pop culture, because one of the next slides I get to, I will say, is all the things that you like, you still get to like, right? I am highlighting particular things, so I don't want to, some of you Pocahontas fans, love the movie and all the rest of that. I want you to walk out being like, I can't like Pocahontas anymore because I saw this thing and this professor is terrible. No. So we call that critical nerd theory, right? And I want to call it as critical nerd theory. It's a paper that I wrote about it. And essentially, it's how do you reconcile these sort of diverse views as you begin to expand consciousness and learn more about history and nuance and still get to like the things that you like, right? So you still get to enjoy these particular things as well as recognizing that. The thing that is put on our shoulders in critical nerd theory is how do we make sense of these things, right? And I'll show you that in the next couple of slides, as a matter of fact. So one of the things that we can see here very clearly, off the shoulder, both sides, right? And most of the Native women that are represented in this time are very buxom. They are very full of matronly wisdom. Even though we are a matriarchal people and matrilineal people, this is really incredibly focused on because this is the contemporary parallel for English and European women at the time. If we think in the 1700s, European women are starting to ask for more rights. They're starting to be more involved. They're starting to want to get this. Well, look, they don't look like that. Take care of your kids. And so Native women, more often than not, in these representations in the early 1700s, have a kid with them. They're taking care because then it's a way that the pop culture reinforces the stereotypes and the boxes that are put into European women where you can say, no, but if the savages are doing this, then you need to be better than that. So go take care of your kids, right? So we see this absolutely in how pop culture reinforces the spaces in which we're living in, both in the mass media as well as politics and policy that are made at the time. And I want to show you exactly where this comes up. So this is an old broadside from 1764 that demonstrates how Native women, and this is though she's right here on the left, she's right there. This comes from a broadside that took place shortly after the massacre of the Conestoga people in 1763 outside of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. There was internal sort of conflict and warfare in Pennsylvania between the Quakers and frontiers people, the Americans, if you will. They were sort of expanding. They weren't Quakers and they weren't quite British. There was this new dynamic, right? And so the new dynamic wanted to get rid of the sort of Quaker hegemony. They didn't like the Quakers in charge anymore. And so this battle, this massacre of the Conestoga people provided an opportunity to do that. And so within mass media, because if you remember, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia was the center of mass media at the time, of printing in the United States. So this broadside comes out, and what essentially it says down here, and I'll sort of summarize this, is that the Native women are luring the Quakers to them so that they can be traitors to the society, to Americana, if you will, right? And so Native women as objectified, and look, once again, we see the sash, we see the open bosom, and so women, Native women especially, get objectified. Now, I will say, personally, I think this is one of the underpinnings as to why we see the issues that we do with MMIW, which is missing murdered Indigenous women, because it is so prevalent in popular culture stretching back 300 to 400 years. This is in the 1763, so 300 years. So this is one of the things to be aware of, and then we see that replicated all throughout time. That's what popular culture does. Popular culture takes these things and draws it out to its nth degree because there's an audience that's looking for it. Now, audiences change. Things change throughout time. Think about just in the past 10 years of your own life. How much has changed? How much has shifted? Popular culture responds to that, but it also reflects it. Art reflecting life, reflecting art, right? It is this constant cycle in this space. And so we see this in these early spaces, and especially with this noble savage. So this is our fundamental. Also on the right's Ben Franklin, just in case anybody couldn't recognize that's old Franklin up in that space. And Franklin was also a traitor to this whole thing too, so they hated Franklin at the time. So now we move into our next period of time, which is called the last of the, right? So it's the vanishing Indian, as we like to say. During this time period, this is about the mid to 1700s, all the way, so the early 1700s all the way to about the early 1800s. There are a number of plays that, because plays at the time were really at broadsides and texts and books that were all about the last of the, and then you insert whatever fictional or real tribe you'd like to put in that place. So Last of the Mohicans, the book by James Fenimore Cooper. How many of y'all had to read that? Is anybody in the back? Anybody in the front? I did. Yeah, it is not required reading anymore, but it was required reading for quite a long time. This was part of the American literary canon. And it tells the story of old Hawkeye right there, how, and really the last of the Mohicans. That was the whole setup, right? So, Chingachgook and the whole family and how he survives, kid dies. It's all about the 7 Years' War. We call it also the French and Indian War, right? As if the French and Indians were fighting. That wasn't a thing. It was the British and the French and the natives were kind of on both sides. So it was really just a whole melange. It was Game of Thrones. I think that's enough of a current pop culture reference for us to understand in this particular space. Now, Last of the Mohicans is one of those ones where critical nerd theory comes in for me because I love this movie. This movie is one of my favorite movies growing up because you got the native folks. At the time this came out the same year as Dancing with Wolves. In the same time frame, I saw them both in the theater. But he's run through the forest, he throws a war club, and he catches a guy, and there's like fight scenes, and they're awesome. And actually, the movie is such a positive representation in many ways, far more superior than the book. But it also contains numerous inaccuracies. The book definitely contains numerous inaccuracies. But what it does is it highlights this one thing that we see right now. I think you might have heard it within pop culture as sort of like the white savior, but I like to call it transference. So it's this transference of this new American character, who's Hawkeye, becoming more native than the native folks in that space. He sort of takes on all of their imbued powers, right? So he's a really good tracker. He's lived with the native folks. He understands the native people. Daniel Day-Lewis is amazing because he plays it to a T. If anybody remembers, if you've seen the movie, he's just like, which direction? And they go, north. How do you get there? It's like, well, you just turn left a little bit, and then you go that direction. He points with his lips, which is a native thing, right? There you go, right over there. So he has that, and he's taking on all of this native identity as a way to reinforce this expansion of the American Empire at the time. And so this expansion means that as native folks are being removed from their land, they're being forced westward, as many of them are being assimilated, as disease and war take their toll, now we have this sort of embodiment of character that takes on that history for native peoples to carry it forward, even though not indigenous, not native, right? But he has grown up and he's adopted in that space. And so it's this new way that we begin to think about the way that America is moving forward as well. It is taking this native identity, this indigenous identity that was here, and moving forward with it without the people that are a part of it. At the end, I am the last of the Mohicans, right? As he says this big prophetic line because his kid is dead. Sorry, spoilers, if you haven't read the book. So his kid is dead. It's been a long time. That really shouldn't be a spoiler. It's 200 years old. So this is one of the most popular books at the time, especially for a burgeoning literate population. And it tells this great story of native folks just, at war. So it brings all of these things together and it sets these things into the space. Also, the score for this is absolutely amazing. If you hear it once, you're going to love it for forever. So now we move into, the next period. So almost overnight in the early 1820s, about 1826, Andrew Jackson is elected and the political winds shift. And so pop culture shifts with that. And with that shift, you move from where you had some sprinklings of these characters throughout, but really was dominated by the noble savage, the vanishing Indian who was just a noble savage that was going away. Now you're hitting to manifest destiny and full westward expansion. And so in that space, you can no longer have a hero or somebody that is sympathetic or that you can be empathetic towards. You need a villain. And the most prominent villain in the 1800s in all of literature, does anybody know who this character is? Can you call it out? It's from the old movie. This is Injun Joe. How many of y'all had to read Tom Sawyer? That was part of the canon. So I know some of you out there. A few? Exactly. So the villain in Tom Sawyer is this character. Now, many people sort of remember Tom Sawyer, the scamp, the rascal, him and Becky. What do we all remember? Whitewashing the fence and getting all his buddies to do it for him, right? He's just a little chuck on the chin kid, right? And he represents this idea of youthful America. And especially in Mark Twain. Again, critical nerd theory, Mark Twain, phenomenal writer in this space. But when you go back into this and you see how Injun Joe is portrayed, not only is he the villain, but he's also a half-breed. Okay, so now we're creating this concept of sort of this, this mixing. How would you mix? And it's the old with the new. And so this villain type is really what begins to cement in the American popular culture mind. So you have the noble savage that's come from this space, and that we would consider the ones that are helpful. So that's Pocahontas is helpful to Americana. That is Sacagawea, helpful to Americana. And then you have the folks that are the villains, right? And that's the circling the wagon. So if you think of any Westerns, where the wagon train's being attacked, that's the native villain. You can see in this cut type that went with the book is Tom falls asleep, he's dreaming, and dreams that Joe is sneaking in and is going to stab him. And so we have this, and so this is the villainy that is being portrayed within this particular time period. And this goes from about 1820 to the early 1900s. And this is really what cements Native identity as that. So there are comic books that I have in my collection from the old sort of what we call sort of the platinum age. And that's back in like the 1920s, all the way up until about the 1940s, 1950s. And a lot of them are these old Westerns. So they pulled from this, and they're these Westerns, and it's Kit Carson, what is it? Davy Crockett. Anybody remember actual Davy Crockett's full title? Davy Crockett, Indian fighter, right? So we begin to see the way that the political winds shift policy, and then that reinforces popular culture. Now, I tend to believe very much in the morality of people. I truly do. I'm an optimist. And I think that most people know right from wrong, and they know that suffering is not good. And so when they see these things, you have to reinforce it through pop culture, because otherwise most people are going to look at me and be like, well, he doesn't look like that. He doesn't look like a bad guy. He's not stabbing people in their sleep. So you're trying to justify all this. But if I show this enough, then it starts to get into everybody's head. And this happens not only with Native folks, but this happens with most marginalized groups in particular spaces when we try to figure out how we're going to represent them. Because the other part about that is once you start to establish the imagery, once you start to establish the framework, it's very difficult to get out of that. So it's very difficult to say that me, when I'm not wearing, my Pueblo vest, my beaded, my beaded medallion is, if it's just me in a hat, my hoodie, it's a little hard to tell that I'm Native, right? That's why I showed that picture back at the beginning, because how can you tell the difference? Well, once we establish that concept of a stereotype, then it stays. And we have to continue to cycle that because it's very hard to get out of that particular framework. So we move into in the 1900s, we move into what we call the tragic chief. This is sort of the last era that brings us into our current frame. And the tragic chief essentially is someone that's everybody's been conquered, and he's just there having to sort of live. He's very sad. It harkens back as echoes of the noble savage because it's all about the environment. You can talk to animals and to trees now. So don't forget, you can talk to trees. It's all about nature. So if you've ever seen this commercial, this is a crying Indian commercial, and somebody throws a can out there or something out their car window and lands at his feet. He's very sad. Not a Native guy, by the way, just to let everybody know. He's an Italian fella, but looks very Native. And I think that's kind of the point, right? The pop culture has set the parameters for what Native needs to look like. Add some braids, add some feathers, darken the skin, you got a Native. Not really a Native, all right? Anybody, if you like The Simpsons, also anything that makes The Simpsons is pop culture. It's a great episode, by the way. Does anybody remember this episode? They have to move Springfield because they've put so much trash in Springfield. And so they literally just moved the town next door because it's just this trash pile. And then he's talking to his buddy, the crying, and he's just like, don't look behind you. And then it goes dark, and then he's just like, ah, and he screams at the end of it. It's a great episode, right? So what we see out of this in terms of the history is that we see this moment where Native folks are sort of, again, out of this era of villainy and out of this era of destruction, there is that sympathy, that empathy for what's happened with Native folks. And so the narrative begins to change, the pop culture begins to change, and it brings Native folks back to that sort of noble savage era. We'll call it the sort of the neo-noble savage as well, but always with a tragic backstory. So that tragic backstory is that, and you see this time and time again in the movies, is that they have to leave their home, they have to leave their family, they have to choose between living in the white man's world or my own home world, right? There are plenty of those. And I think the Jim Thorpe story is like that, with Burt Lancaster as the hero of that, right? So he has to choose, has all of these choices that create the separation, right? The past with the present, and that's what we're kind of constantly going on. It goes back to identity, authenticity, and erasure. So, for comic books, here's a lot of what you see with comic books. And you can see a lot of these titles. There's Tonto, there's Straight Arrow, Rex Weiler and the Apache Kid, Red Wolf, and these graphic interpretations, Deer Slayer. You have Scalp Hunters, kind of there in the middle. You have Firebrand, White Daughter of the Sioux. So you have all of these sort of westerns that consolidate all of these identity spaces. And a lot of them feature, I think, American Eagle, Straight Arrow, definitely Scalp Hunter. It's sort of that Last of the Mohicans. They're all non-native folks that grew up with natives, right? And they became heroes. And they're heroes. They're taking care of, whatever they can, right? They're taking care of their people. They're fighting in westerns. So they're great because it creates this space for native heroes to exist. But you still have so many of these particular stereotypes that exist so much in the westerns that is happening within comic books. So this was really going back to my original story, is that this is a lot of what's out there. I do want to make one aside. Oh yeah, White Indian, that's the other one. I do want to make an aside about Tonto, for those of you that are Tonto fans at all out there. Tonto in the old radio program, and also in the comic, or in the old radio program and of course the television show, really talks in what they call, it's a terminology called pidgin English, right? Oh, white men go there, right? It's sort of this primitivization of it. But the writers for him, when he got his own spin-off, the writers for him, all of his thought bubbles are perfect English. Like, his thought bubbles are absolutely perfect, right? So it's showing that he's super, super smart, right? Because he always helps the Lone Ranger getting out of all the things, but he's not able to communicate. And that's really that difference, right? So it's actually kind of brilliant, and going to kind of look at that. The man who also played Tonto in the series called Jay Silverheels, his name was Jay Silverheels, is an incredible native actor, brought a lot of other native actors and ushered in sort of the golden age of native actors in Hollywood in the 1960s, 50s, and 60s. So here's when it starts to change. And now you begin to see native folks taking over this particular space and beginning to develop out representation. So you see Ava Mirabel, she's Pueblo. She is actually one of the first sequential artists, native comic book artists. So during World War II, she was part of the Corps, and she used to create these little stories, just like Beetle Bailey and whatnot. She had G.I. Gertie. She's an incredible artist in and of herself, but she was one of the first ones. Now, they're not sort of native-oriented. It's just characters there. But she's one of the first. She's actually probably the first that was doing sequential art, newspaper-style art, that is the precursor to comic books. And so there's not a lot of these that remain, so there's only a few of them that people can find. There's, I think, about, like, she worked on this probably for about a year and a half, in terms of these stories, but there's really only a handful that people can find out of these particular stories from her. So she's kind of like the grandmother of native sequential comic book style art, cartoon art, if you will. The next to come around is Vincent Craig, who created this character called Mutton Man. And Mutton Man Vincent Craig was an editorial cartoonist. So he was actually doing full page spreads. So not just the single panels anymore, but full page spreads. Takes place on the Navajo reservation. And it was his way to sort of tell stories and talk about the Navajo reservation with this character, Mutton Man, who got his superpowers from radiation. They all got superpowers from radiation back then in early comics, right? But it was very prescient for the Navajo Nation because we had a bunch of uranium mines out there in central western New Mexico and eastern Arizona and Navajo Nation. So there's all these uranium mines. So he was using it as political commentary. It's very funny. Also very difficult to find a number of these. And there's some folks that are trying to work on pulling all these together. Navajo Times has most of the repository. And Mr. Craig died, I want to say about 10 years ago. But it's a great story, and it's really one of the first native superheroes in this space, right? There's also this particular character, and I'm sorry, I cannot remember her name right now, but I just found this. It's non-native artist, but she actually predates as a solo female superhero. She predates Wonder Woman by 2 years. So this one, and again, I can find the name, I don't. Where is she? It's somewhere in there. I'll have to find it again because I just found this. Like, it was last year. I was like walking through a museum. I was like, what the? Took a picture of it, right? And so you can find out a lot more about her. This is the panel for it. She's like the first solo female superhero. And native. Takes care of her people. Fights against people that are attacking Eskimo and Inupiaq folks, right? Incredible character. Now we get into where the comic books really start, and the comic books really start with Scout. by Timothy Truman back in 1984. So he created this particular character. It's a post-apocalyptic America. So think of Mad Max, American Mad Max. It's all open, and his main character is an Apache that is going around trying to take care of folks, a little Robin Hood-esque, as well as Mad Max-esque, right? So he's a warrior for justice, and he's a warrior for taking care of people that are downtrodden in this sort of apocalyptic age, right? So that was 84. Tim Truman created this character. He ran this all the way through. It was an independent comic line. He ran this all the way through 89, I want to say. He's done a couple of subsequent follow-ups, and this one is the most recent one that will be coming out very soon, called Scout Marauder, which takes place following our main character's kids. So it's kind of the next generation. The next one, these three all came, well, I guess the next one that came out is Tribal Force, and that came out in 1994, about 10 years later, by John Proudstar. John was native from Arizona. He decided that he is, I would say, a social worker. He's also an actor. You've seen him in probably a bunch of shows. If you've seen Reservation Dogs, John's been in there. He's been in a bunch of stuff. John, as a social worker, dealt with kids that were dealing with domestic violence, molestation. And also as a comic book follower in the 90s, he was like, Superman is not coming out to the res. Nobody's helping my kids. So I'm going to write superheroes that are here to help my kids. So that representation part, but also a manifestation that is part of thinking through how comic books can work for us. If you all remember, Superman started by two Jewish fellas that wanted to see someone that would take care of the little guy. And so they created this Superman. The guy that was there about truth, justice, and the American way, the most Americana that you can get. That was created as a manifestation of what we wanted to see. And so John follows in that same vein by creating Tribal Force, which is the first native superhero team, created by a native artist, native writer, and essentially follows how they're taking care of this young woman, rifts in the universe. It's a great story. John continues to write it to this day. And I think he continues to do various volumes whenever he can between his acting, because he's acting too. The next two to come out simultaneously came out in the early 2000s, both Kagagi and Super Indian. Super Indian, a lot like Mutton Man, is more satirical and more funny by Arrogant Star. She tells a story. Hubert Logan eats tainted government commodity cheese, gains his superpowers, and goes to save he helps out his folks from these sort of grand characters, one like the anthropologist who's trying to collect natives and keep them and hide them away, right? So very much, satirical with sort of that like a political edge to it in terms of the way that she likes to write. Kagagi the Raven, Jay Ochik, writes that based on his own cultural community and his own cultural characters, which is the Raven, Raven the Trickster, Raven the Demigod. And so the character has superpowers, fights zombies, helps protect his community. So we see this theme that's really emerging from these spaces, right? It's this idea of taking care of the community, taking care of its protection. And one of the things that you notice with all of these characters is none of them look like what we've previously seen in all of the setups. So there is a conscious choice by native creatives, artists and writers, to push back against those historical representations. That's why I always start with that, because you got to see what was out there, because everybody that's doing this kind of work is building on that. Does Hubert have long hair? Yep. But he's not got feathers dangling from that. There's no bow and arrow to be seen. I don't see a single person with a parrot or a feather, right? And although the young woman in the front is very buxom, that's the 90s. Just 90s comics were, they're just 90s comics, right? They call it the cheesecake era. So similar things, but she's fully clothed. You don't got kids, not a half sash. And her hair is definitely, well, I guess it's kind of blowing in the wind. But that's because she's like fallen, she's got powers. So we can see how native creatives, illustrators, writers, the folks are taking those concepts, identity, authenticity, and erasure, and beginning to reorient and create that. Now, within the past 10 years, what we have seen is this incredible explosion of this kind of work that has begun to develop. So you see things that come out of tribes themselves that are pulling on particular narratives. The Chickasaw Adventures tells a story about a young man that goes back in time, trying to remember his heritage so that he can bounce through time. So it's got a little bit of quantum leap, got a little bit of time travel. Native heritage goes in this. This came out of Chickasaw Nation Contracted, the artist to be able to do this and create this story for them. And it's actually a pretty thick volume. Like they did a number of issues of this throughout the run of this particular comic. I think it ran 12 or 16 issues, being able to tell the story of this young man bouncing through time, learning about his heritage, and telling a really good story. You begin to see things where you're bringing in things, you begin to see comics where you're bringing in concepts and other ideas around science fiction and retelling of traditional stories. So Moonshot takes traditional stories and puts them in science fiction contexts. All done, native writers, native storytellers, some non-native artists. It's a mix of both. There are 3 volumes of this where you can see that, where they brought in native folks into the space. Marvel got into the act just recently, drawing in native writers, native storytellers to be able to bring in the ideas around indigenous voices. Some of y'all know my Taboo. Taboo has a little something in here. So the musician, artist, entrepreneur, bon vivant, if you will. So you can begin to see how this is one of the first times that Marvel has allowed other folks to really work with their stuff. Marvel is very contained. You also see that in Kohari. So if y'all know that particular character that developed out of the Marvel What If, it's the first time in like a decade where a new character has come in. Also in this, you see one of the characters down at the bottom left is Echo by David Mack, one of the first native characters, one of the new, again, a new character that's developed. David Mack developed her in the 90s and created this particular character. David, I think, has descendancy, so he's native descendant, and created this particular character, Echo, who is deaf, who is, a mimic and a badass. So if you ever read some of the stories in Daredevil, she is present in that as well. And then you begin to see how the storytelling continues to emerge. This is one of our pieces called Ghost River, where we tell the story of the 1763 Conestoga Massacre, the rise and fall of the Conestoga, and it's other ways that we're utilizing illustration, sequential art, different narratives to be able to tell not just superhero stories, but also regular stories. Stories about community, stories about people, stories that deal with hard histories, hard lessons. But the way that we always write this, I am the writer on this, so I'm just tooting my horn. On the writer on this is always trying to put in that it's not a narrative of death and dying, but it is a narrative of life. We can tell our stories and our histories and still reflect on the fact that Native folks are still here. As we heard in our introduction, we're still around. We're still here to tell these stories. And these stories enrich us all. And that is like the most important part, I think, for me, is that there's always room for stories. Just like there's always room for Jell-O or, I don't know, pizza. Sorry if you're lactose intolerant. There's always room for it. And so I always think that in any of these moments, all of these stories help enrich us in these spaces. Another story that we tell is this spooky story called Sky. It's a Cherokee story about Cherokee mythology by Roy Boney Jr., an incredible artist, storyteller in the work that he does. For those of you that have seen this wonderful, amazing show, it is absolutely fantastic. If you haven't, go to FX, go to Hulu. I guess it's Disney now, Disney Plus. I don't even know anymore. Everything's changing. It tells the story of 4 young people on the reservation. These are my kiddos. These are the kids I used to teach. It's an amazing story. It blends magical realism, it blends culture, tradition, heritage, and history, and brings in a lot of pop culture as well to it, and has positioned itself into that pop culture sphere. Once again, look at all these young folks, look like regular young folks. There's no feathers, there's no buckskin, there's no fringe. They do at some point wear that. There's some traditional stuff that goes on, but that's not the representation of these particular characters. You can see it in video games that develop telling histories. When Rivers Were Trails, this is a spin off of, or a parallel narrative to the Oregon Trail, and it tells the journey of Native folks from Minnesota to California, which is what actually happened in history. But you can see some of the choices you make. You can gift, you can trade. Nobody dies of dysentery, so it's actually a pretty tame game. So you're good. You have games like Never Alone, which are all in language, and they tell the story of Cook Inlet Inupiaq people. And so you got video games that have come out of this in popular culture. You have great use of different art styles. This is Alaska Native Chickaloonies, and it's just kind of goofy if anybody knows, Asterix, right? So the old, the old Scandinavian, I think, cartoons and comic books, very similar to that, using tradition, using modern art styles, telling these frames in comics again. This is some of the work that we do, propaganda posters during the pandemic, where we're just kind of putting stuff out like wash your hands, protect your elders, things like that for our own communities, using this comic book style, using a propaganda narrative, so sort of recycling these spaces of how do we tell stories. Pueblo Futurisms, Virgil Ortiz, doing some amazing, fantastical narrative work, and doing that through fashion, doing that through giant pottery works and sculptures that he puts together that tell sort of this dystopic, utopic future of Pueblo people. You can look up Virgil Ortiz's work. It's absolutely phenomenal. Star Wars. Any Star Wars fans in the house? Woo! May the Force be with you. So this is Navajo Star Wars. It was translated into Navajo. This is the original cast. We got them back together for one of our events. And so they're all there. We would always show that. So hearing Star Wars in a different language is such a trip. They've now translated into 4 languages, traditional languages. I think it's in Hawaiian, it's in Anishinaabe, it's in, I want to say, Choctaw and Navajo. So they've translated into multiple languages because everybody wants to know about a galaxy far, far away. Role-playing games for our role players that are in this space. If you are a role-playing person, more role-playing games. There's RPGers in the house. Matching games, card games that show native heroes, that show native superheroes. European, we call European style, but collaborative tabletop games about taking care. So this is basically a variation on Settlers of Catan, except you're not trying to conquer all the space, you're trying to like cultivate it and help and support everybody. So this is up in Nunami, so this comes out of First Nations Canada, way north. Cards for decolonization. Robots are there. And then, again, nary a feather to be seen. And these are language learning robots that are designed by an incredible native young woman, Anishinaabe young woman, who has created these. She's working, with various sort of augmented reality, some AI stuff, but they teach the language and they answer back. So they sit on your shoulder. Treaty cards, ways to be able to tell different types of stories. And of course, what we come back down to is the fun. And the fun in creating comic books, the fun in creating these types of spaces that really challenge the narratives that have been established with us for 400 and some years. Native folks are taking the time to not only embrace some of those pieces, Star Wars, characters, different art styles, but to bring their own culture, their own humor, their own delight into these spaces to be able to make sure that we can tell these stories and that we can tell them in a way that pushes back against those narratives, but brings out the humanity of Native and Indigenous peoples, that brings out our histories, as tragic as they may be, as also as celebratory as they may be, and are and continue to be. So with that, there's me. That's how I know you can actually. It's my outfit. It's like, it's gear up, right? So that's the same one. This is a lot newer back then, so it's a little older now. But the same thing. This is our comic shop called Red Planet Books and Comics in Albuquerque. You can find us more at the Indigenous Imagination Workshop. If you want to find me online, I'm at Dr. IndigiNerd, pretty much across all social platforms. So you can find me on TikTok, Insta, what else? Facebook. Does anybody use it? Do young people even use that? I'm not on Snapchat, y'all. So I don't know if you're snapping. Okay, I got nothing. Thanks for shaking your head. At least one person makes me feel a little less old. So I appreciate it. Thank you all for your time, for listening. I hope this was a little bit educational for you. I will say, if you want more of this stuff, plenty of it is out there. Go find it. There's so many great shows. There's so many great things. If you have any questions, I think I got, 5 minutes? We'll do a little Q&A. We got 5 minutes. If you got to bounce, I get you. Don't everybody leave at once. Take your time. Go one at a time. I'm just playing, man. It's all sad if everybody leaves simultaneously. Everybody's leaving simultaneously. That's fine. Give me the applause then, at least. Y'all are great. I know your students. Thank you so much for showing up. If anyone else wants some questions, please stay. I'll answer some questions. I got one over here. No. Yes? Oh, sweet. No.
There's an online question. We had a question.
Oh, got an online question.
On the online
All right, sweet. Thanks, online question. I don't even know where the camera is for the online, so I'm sorry I have not. I think it's like, is it up there? Oh, it's over there. Hey, how y'all doing? Okay, go for it.
All right, this is Emma Mercado, double major in creative writing and history, who asks, what is your opinion on the wise Native American chief whose literary purpose is for exposition?
Oh, yes. Yes, the expository Native chief that gives us backstory. Very important for our literary traditions. Follows very much, I think, it's that similar sort of noble savage space is where they would occupy that, right? And I think even today, that sort of tragic chieftain, so they occupy this space of being able to provide narrative. It's the character that comes in and says, "This is all the Indian burial ground," right? And you're just like, and then the spooky music starts, right? So it's a narrative trope that still follows into these particular same spaces. Now, the hard part within terms of any literary spaces that can be done well if you're aware of the tropiness that's a part of it. So you can use the tropiness, right? You can use it to your advantage. A great moment of that is in the movie Maverick. So Maverick, if you go back and watch that, the one with Mel Gibson and Graham Greene, that basically they have it panning over, and there's this moment where you see Graham Greene kind of playing, the Indian guide for him. And they pan over, and they have all the native folks. And what are they doing? Oh, they're all doing the ceremonial stuff, and they're banging on the drum. And this is how they're doing it. They're like, and these guys are sitting there at the table. And it's one of the most brilliant representations because as you begin to see, as Graham Greene explains the story, he's like, man, we got this Russian rich guy. We've been so poor. This is true. It's history, right? Like, they've been pushed out of their land. They got no resources. They're like, he's the chief. He's trying to take care of his people. We've been so poor. This rich Russian wants to see the West. So we give him the West. I just wish he didn't have to hear the drums all the damn time. And so this idea of how we're kind of commodifying Native identity and the reflection of that is so genius. So back to the original question. It depends on how you approach that particular character. If it's Basil exposition, they don't need to necessarily be a native chief, right? If it's somebody that's writing that, if it's required by the script, if it's necessary and you can bring nuance to that particular character, then you can bring them in. Character's going to exposit all the time. You got to let the reader know what's going on. So mostly it's how are you utilizing the narrative and how are you aware of what's happened prior to it. So that's my answer to you, digital world.
Oh, there are other questions?
I just wanted to say I'm trying to do something very similar to you in that I want to do a graphic novel on Rhode Island history.
Nice.
So I want to ask, how did you start doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been writing for forever. I mean, that's the first part, right? I just started writing, and then I learned the form. I just started picking. So I've been doing theater for a while, so I sort of knew how to put a script together as a writer. But then you can go. I mean, there's so many resources online now, but mostly I just was like, all right, I guess I'm just going to start writing comic books. The biggest hurdle for me was finding artists, because artists also need to eat. And so that is always the issue, is finding, because I'm the writer, so I've been trying to draw a little bit more and teach myself. I am certainly not up to the skill level of so many of the people that I've worked with. So when I got started, it was really just sort of sitting down and saying, this is the story that I want to start with. And the first story that I actually wrote was first full comic that I created, 32 pages, was Six Killer. And it's the story of an Osage woman that is seeking revenge for the murder of her sister. And it really was with me sitting down, wanting to make a statement when the Violence Against Women Act was renewed, and they left out Native people in the first round before they added additional amendments to it. I was infuriated, and I was like, well, I can post about it, or I can write a story about it. And I want to write a Kill Bill style story of a Native woman that is all vengeance. And that was how I got started. And I also love Alice in Wonderland. So I was like, I want to do Alice in Wonderland and American McGee's Alice in Wonderland. So I was like, I want to do Alice in Wonderland with a little bit of horror and a little bit of stabby. And I'm going to see how those two intertwine with each other. So I started doing some outlines with it. I talked with some folks that I know, 'cause it's set kind of in Oklahoma and Cherokee territory. And I was like, this is kind of what I'm outlining. And so I just started working through it. A big blocks of like, okay, what are the images that I want to see? So if you're thinking about comics, what are the images that you want people to stick with? Like that's the big thing you're thinking about it in the same way that you're making movies, except you get a lot more control over how you want that one panel shaped. So my two things is getting started would be, as always, as we always say as creatives, just start. But really, check out form, read a lot of comics, see the kind of styles that are coming out, and then think about the story you want to write. Think about that narrative, and how do you, more than anything, weave a narrative that's going to keep me turning the pages. That's what I always think about as a writer, and especially a comic book writer, is how do I get you, the reader, to make sure you want to flip that to that next page? That's my job and my responsibility. So, cool.
Yeah, one more online question.
One more online question. What's up?
So, how do you envision the future of Amerindian representation across comics and animations?
Yeah.
Is there a way to combine the traditional with the alternative worlds? In this latter respect, this question asker contemplates Amerindian existence in spaces in which colonialism never occurred.
Oh, yeah.
A space where Amerindians are not on reservations or marginalized South America.
Yeah. No, so that is a great question. There are some examples of that. So a lot of the work that's happening around Indigenous Futurisms is really drawing a lot of those. It's speculative, right? So this idea of what does it look like? So I showed it very briefly, but the role-playing game Coyote and Crow has a number of little small novels that go with it. It's a role-playing game that develops that world that basically says there is no colonization. So what happens in the Americas in that space? And just kind of extrapolating. You see that again, Virgil Ortiz in that space of what happens. 1680 is our rebellion, so this Pueblo rebellion in the distant future. So you're starting to see a lot of those speculations and speculative fictions and indigenous futurisms that are emerging. So I see that really in terms of, I think more of it is going to continue to play out. I think more of it is coming into the world because folks want to see that. I also see more things like North of North. So if you get on Netflix and watch North of North, is a marvelous show. It's comedy. It's a sitcom about a young woman that's kind of trying to think of a new life in this as a Native woman in this rural area. It is very funny, but it's. If you know, kind of like the CW. Right? It's kind of like that. It's not everything has to be weighty. It's just kind of fun. But it does blend to tradition. Tradition is in there. And modern day hookups, because Native folks hook up too, y'all. I hate to break it to you online. You heard it here first, right? So I think that you're seeing more of that to find spaces in all of the genres where we have not been represented. So there's more mysteries, there's more romance novels, there's more science fiction that's coming out. And science fiction in the best way possible, that it explores concepts. It's not like natives in space, right? That's an easy trope. That's Chakotay from Star Trek. Like, just kick a native in space and it's fine. It's really exploring, like, what does that mean around exploration and colonization and territory and, what does that look like when we got spaceships, right? So I think that's the direction that it's going. And I think there's some incredible folks that are out there. So I'd highly look up Indigenous Futurisms because it's really sort of across the board, not only here in North America. You can see some great stuff in Australia and New Zealand. So our Indigenous relatives and kin that are also writing and doing amazing work around that as well. One more question.
Before I go, somebody really quick asked, where can you purchase Ghost River physically? That was
it'll be ATCG Books and Comics. So you just go to atcgbooksandcomics.com. So that's where we have it. And if you're looking for a digital copy, which also has has really cool video work in it, that's ghostriver.org. And so you can find that through the library company. So that's where you can find everything that we've got. We got lots of native comics and books, and got both of my comic books. So Cindy Coyote, Trickster Extraordinaire is my other comic book. So, yep, everything's there.
And we'll ask one last question.
One last question. Close it out.
So we get a lot of requests from educators for resources, a lot of teachers in the class. And I wonder what your thought is on incorporating Indigenous comics, the stories that they tell, what should our recommendations be? What should we tell them to look for in a comic? Choosing one,
Mhm.
I'm not sure quite what I'm asking, but you get the idea.
Yeah, resources for educators. So obviously, just find me, hit me up. We got emails and all the rest of that. So we've got a lot of options for that meet a number of age ranges. One of the things that I always look at with teachers, and one of the things that we're working with National Museum of the American Indian on the current project is how to read a comic. So I think we're going to have a resource that's coming out of that as a quick resource for teachers of just in general how to read a comic. It's not that kids don't know how to read comic. They don't know how to. It's not that they don't know how to read, but building that consciousness of kind of like how do you page through it, how do the lines look, especially when they're younger, is always really good. And then, resource wise, I think the main thing to look for, obviously part of this is looking for the tropes. Like if you start to see those in the space, then you got to question, is this a native person that put this together? And then you can dig a little bit further, and then you kind of can see, so that you get some of that framework. Like there's a comic that came out called Peter Panzerfaust years ago. Came out of Image Comics. It's a great comic, and it's a retelling of Peter Pan in World War II. And Tiger Lily is Métis and French Canadian, and she's like 60. She's just this monster assassin in world. I mean, she just stabby for Nazis everywhere, right? Non-native writer, but really, I mean, I wouldn't say it for littles, but really good content, right? Like in terms of native representation, native identity. So the biggest issue, more than anything, is that there's some micro stuff that's been done. There's some big macro stuff that's been done, but the regional, local stuff is something that we are trying to continue to encourage, because I feel like that's the kind of thing of like, how do you tell those stories? How do you tell those stories in a way that's authentic and not pedantic? I think that's the big thing. Is also kids aren't going to read stuff that's pedantic. They're just not. They're not going to find it interesting, and so you may have a test on it, but it's not going to filter into here. So the best thing is, how can you find the things that are telling a story? So we do Ghost River, very historical, big chunks of text, but mostly it's telling this narrative that flashes back and forth in time and has images kind of all over the place. That's what we were doing. Cindy Coyote is a high school girl that is the daughter of Coyote the Trickster, and so she's essentially, immortal. Like she can break everything. So I was like, how do I tell a story about tricksters and in a way that is telling a story like the trickster stories I grew up with and modernizing them? So I think those are the things to look for. And of course, reaching out to me, I got a great list. That's it.
All right. Once again, thank you
We're
to
out.
Francis.
Thank you, online people. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Tawahe. Woo! Thank you, man. That's awesome. All right. Brilliant. Brilliant.